Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 2 of the GoT Rewatch podcast, presented by the Terrible Video Gamers Club. I'm your host for the evening, Tyler Schatz, Call of the Great Dothraki Horde. With me tonight are two of the blood riders of mine, Mr. Gary Delaney. You have to say hi, Gary. They can't pick up. Try it. Try it again, Gary.
Hello, everyone.
There we go. And Mr. Nick Castillo.
Castillo always pays his debts. Howdy, folks.
This episode of the podcast, we're going to be reviewing episode 5, 6, 7, and 8 of season 1 of Game of Thrones here. Jumping right into episode 5, titled The Wolf and the Lion. Here it starts basically like this. The episode opens with pretty much just the opening shot of the scenic view of the Eyrie. And we learn that's where Catherine Stark, formerly Tully, has taken Tyrion Lannister to stand trial for what she believes is the attempted murder on her son's life perpetuated by Tyrion. Nick, do we have just a little bit of detail to talk about with the Eyrie?
Yeah, that's fine. So the Eyrie is the kingdom or the house seat for House Arryn, Arryn. And they are just known as the Vale, or the Knights of the Vale, the House of the Vale. I have to air the one grievance that, since we're talking about the show that we're watching here, is it's very inconsistent. Every time we see the big picturesque view of the Vale or the scenery, it seems like it's described in a different sense. My first note on the scene is that in the opening crawl where you see the map and the layout of the Vale is shown kind of in like a gorge between some high rocks, which is actually how it's depicted in the history book that I have, The World of Ice and Fire, is that it's kind of this passageway down through a canyon, and so there's very little chance that the Vale can ever be attacked. I think in one of these episodes here that we're about to talk about, as they're approaching it, Tyrion says it's defined as near impregnable. You can't get to the Vale if you're trying to siege it, because of how it's guarded on all sides by heavy rocky crags. And then all of a sudden, when you see it in the first opening part of this episode 5, is it's kind of like off on an outcropping overlooking a cliff, and so it's very out in the open, very
Not
like it's kind of bare. No, you're good.
So not to interrupt you here, but isn't it the Vale is the region, the Eyrie is the city capital house seat of the Vale, though, right? And
Correct.
If I remember right, I think the show kind of is doing describing it a little bit better here. Of there is a canyon you have to walk through in the Vale to get to the Eyrie, which the Eyrie is a castle built basically on a cliffside, I think, or something like that, but it's basically built in such a way that it would be nigh impossible for an army to attack it head on. It's not a traditional place that you can assault the main gates, because it's I remember in the books they talked a lot about there was ropes and all of these pulleys and carts and stuff they had to ride just to get into the Eyrie's castle.
In order to get there, yeah.
Yeah, and I don't think they talked about it very much in the show, but
I remember something in the books about how there was, it's like a hoist cart that you take apples and fruit up into the city, and they were giving Tyrion shit because he's a child. He's a child, so let's fucking put him with the apples to bring him up. And I think it was Cat was just like, oh, you can. I don't have an Apian press. I'll take it. Or maybe I'm thinking of something else.
yeah, I vaguely remember. Like I said, I vaguely remember some of those parts in the book about they talked about all these pull bridges and stuff like that that you would. Yeah. Anyways, we kind of get an introduction to the Eyrie, and then we jump back down to King's Landing, where Ned is examining the body of Sir Hugh. Sir Hugh, who was Jon Arryn's squire, who was just recently killed by the Mountain in the previous episode there. And he kind of learned...
Silent Sisters.
Yep, the Silent Sisters are there prepping the body for burial or moving it to wherever it needs to go. And then
Septus-looking people.
And then you learn that just recently Sir Hugh had gotten new armor, which seemed kind of strange to Ned, as this guy was just a squire not long ago. How was he able to all of a sudden afford a brand new set of armor to kind of wear in this jousting tournament, which ultimately, as we kind of discussed in the last episode, probably didn't help him survive his first round of jousting with the mountain there.
Yeah, definitely not. And a very fancy piece of armor. It's like gold or something. Looks very lavish.
All right, and then go ahead, Gary.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. It was a nice armor. I don't remember much about that armor. Sir Hugh is introduced in one episode and dies in the same episode. So
they said that he was formerly the squire to Jon Arryn, and so he was very close to the person who just passed away as Hand, thus paving the way for Ned Stark to be the Hand.
And this is kind of all intertwining into Ned's kind of investigation to try and figure out what actually happened. Like, what was the reason Jon Arryn actually died for? Like, did something happen that caught, like,
right,
led to his death?
I think at this point, he's still investigating that, and he assumes that like no one can be trusted, and the Lannisters are up to something, and he fears for his friend. I think maybe that's later this episode. Anyway, continue on. Sir Hugh, and then I think it cuts to the king.
Yep, Ned learns that the king wants to participate in the jousting tournament, which is a bad idea for multiple reasons. As Ned explains to him, like, no knight in their right mind will actually challenge the king full on into a jousting tournament for fear of killing the king. And Robert is just upset. He wants to do it, and then he yells at little Lancel Lannister to go get the breastplate stretcher because he's gotten too fat for his armor. And you get
the equivalent of the elbow grease or blinker fluid.
Blinker fluid, muffler belt.
Mm-hmm.
And they kind of sit there.
He makes a little comment too that like Lancel was hired because he's like the cousin to Cersei Lannister, the queen. Yep. And he's like, yeah, Cersei made me hire him. So he really doesn't care much for Lancel, but he's just sort of this lackey who's in that whole episode just kind of getting berated at every turn by Robert.
And then there's a nice point that's kind of touched on there that it was actually Jon Arryn who suggested the marriage between Cersei and Robert to kind of help consolidate power and heal the lands after the Robert's Rebellion there.
Yeah, everything that's mentioned about Jon Arryn points to that he was a great counselor or hand, tried to do a bunch of good for the realm.
Any other thoughts on that king? I think it was just a lot of exposition about the king and about how, like, I don't know, just kind of some character building of the relationship between the two of them.
Yep.
Like, that they were two people who could speak. Ned could speak truth to power. He could speak honestly to Robert, and no one else could because he had his. Like, Ned truly has his respect because, so that's just a good telling scene of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
He like outwardly calls him fat. Clearly he's gained some weight, and they all laugh about it. But the second Lancel laughs, it's like, how dare you speak ill of the king? Just to put the fear of God into Lancel. Yeah, very, very much so.
Yes, the interaction between Robert and Lancel is very, like, I guess telling to what I think is less well demonstrated in the show that, like, King Robert used to be a fucking badass. And then, like,
very much so.
If King Robert used to be a badass and he's got, like, this little pencil-necked freaking Lannister being his squire, when somebody calls him fat, like, if you call, like, a 7-foot-tall guy fat, and you're a pencil neck little kid, they're like, what the hell? Why? Like, I'm the big guy. Like, you need, like, nobody calls me fat. Mm-hmm. So just kind of that, not, I don't want to say bully mentality, but just a alpha male mentality.
Well, I think, just really quick too, I think that Robert does acknowledge that too. Like, he has that line previously where he was talking about war stories in that one of the last episodes with Jaime and Sir Varys and someone. He's like, gods, I was strong. He knows how far he's sort of fallen and how he's gained weight, and he's just sort of this shadow of his former self. I wrote down, this is sort of, we start to really see the unraveling of, Robert Baratheon from the Robert's Rebellion, Robert that we've heard about in these sort of stories or his tellings of what's happened prior into kind of how King Robert has just kind of been a downward spiral and shadow of his former self.
Yep. Good points there. Next we move back into like the tournament that is still going on there, and we're introduced to the Knight of Flowers, Sir. Is it Lawrence?
Loris, Loris.
Loris Martell. Okay,
Tyrell.
Loris Martell.
Tyrell.
And
Tyrell.
Tyrell, their sigil is the rose.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's like a flower for the Tyrells.
We'll talk about House Tyrell a little later here, I think. So we'll just kind of leave that off to the side now. But then you get Loris's joust with the mountain, and there's a little bit of trickery. I don't know if you guys picked up on that, of why Loris is actually able to defeat the mountain's horse and defeat the mountain in the jousting combat.
Loris's horse is in heat, so the mountain's horse is unstable or
unnerved.
It's just like unnerved.
Yep.
Like flinches at the last minute or something like that, or is able to flinch or somehow and open up its rider, and so Loris is able to unseat him in his joust and knock him off his horse.
And then the mountain, I think, shouts for his squire to bring his sword, which is, I think, the biggest sword we've probably seen so far next to ice.
Yes.
It's just a huge, and he literally, I don't know if he cuts the horse's head clean off or just takes the horse down with one pretty good swing.
I think
he almost takes the head off.
Yeah, I think in the show he almost takes the head off, but I think he's probably supposed to take the headlight clean off in the one swing there. To just backtrack,
that's what winners do.
To backtrack just real quickly there's that little comment from Peter Baelish about Lord Renly and Loris Tyrell there.
Yeah. That's a good little nod.
That's a little nod to there. Something comes up there a little bit later about that one. But then there too, so the mountain is very angry about losing, so he takes off to attack Loris there and kind of catches him off guard, which he's sitting there like trying to just defend himself as much as he can with this little tiny sword, and that gets yelled out for help there, and then this is when
little very decorative armor, like not a scratch.
Yep. Yeah, he's got fancy. Well, they say too that he's got a lot of money. That the Tyrells from the Reach have a lot of money.
The same, I think. Loris Tyrell is a counterpoint to the Lannister, Jaime Lannister, where they're both very good swordsmen. They both have armor that doesn't have a scratch on it, like very well groomed.
I think so.
Yeah, I think that is definitely made, because I think the Tyrells are talked about basically being like the second one of like the second wealthiest family in all of Westeros. But then, so with Loris kind of needing help there against the mountain, Sandor Clegane steps in to basically help fight his brother Gregor there, which you get kind of the first Clegane Bowl battle there of those two fighting one another. I said it. Sure.
Number one.
What, Gary?
The mountain actor number one.
Yes.
The mountain actor number one.
Anyway, he gets replaced in a later season, and I think in the previous episode he stabs Sir Hugh, and in this episode he like freaks out and cuts off a horse's head, but I don't think he shows up for a while. I think this was his.
I think, I believe this is the last time you probably see him in season 1 here.
Yeah. It was interesting too. They also make a reference to kind of who he is, and they say that he is also Lord Tywin's, has been referenced as Lord Tywin's mad dog. Yep. And so it seems kind of like he does have a tie into who is Jaime and Cersei and Tyrion's father, the Warden of the West, Lord Tywin. And so kind of more, like, we're introduced to him later in this episode, but it's more foreshadowing that this huge, monstrous man, as dangerous and violent and prone to wrath as he is controlled by someone. So if he does something negative, it seems like there might be an ulterior motive there that he's doing it on behalf of.
And so then, after like all of this stuff at the jousting tournament, kind of concludes there with Sandor basically and Gregor being yelled at by the king to cease battling and stuff like that. We cut over to actually. So I was wrong there in my first opening part. That we cut actually to Tyrion heading towards the Vale where Kat's sister lives. So this is the kind of introduction and
about the Eyrie too, and wasn't that we started in the Eyrie, it was that the Eyrie shows up in the introduction.
Yep, it shows up in the opening
introduction, which
yeah.
is the first time you see it. Anyway.
Yes. Yep. And then they're attacked by the hill tribe there, and then you get to see Tyrion kind of help save Catelyn's life, and you get to see Bronn. I don't even think he's still named yet there, but Bronn is kind of like one of the few surviving people there in the group, along with Catelyn and Master at Arms Sir Roderick, I believe is his name again.
Yes. Yeah, the dude with the beard that's like braided together.
Yep. Although he does take an injury there. He gets like sliced across the back, I believe.
The neck, like the back of his neck.
Yeah.
Or something. Anyway.
I did have a quick note on that too, that they did make an interesting point to show that Tyrion had an opening where he could have left. It showed him looking back and forth at like the horses. He could have made a break for it, but then saw that Lady Catelyn Stark was being attacked, and so would be attacked. So turned back around to go defend her with the shield and ward off her attacker. And so, it shows that despite all the negative things that people say about Tyrion, like in the last episode, they said that he was the killer or that he's the attacker. And even in this episode, they're like accusing him and they're like, "We found your dagger." And he says, "What imbecile arms an assassin with their own well-known blade?" And so, it's like he's very smart. He's very quick. But then that little instance too, it shows that he's also very honorable. Like he could very easily get away from this threat and this person who wants him dead. But it shows that he's willing to stay and defend her out of what necessary need? None. Just it's the right noble thing to do.
Just assumes that this will, I don't know, each maybe just assumes this will all blow over, like, or he'll get rescued, so he has no reason to run and possibly get them mad and get killed some other way.
Mm-hmm. Bronn, the character that you mentioned, Tyler, yes, isn't not named at this point, but does have a little interaction with Tyrion afterwards, where we see he smashes this Catelyn's attacker with the sword, with the shield, and afterward he's kind of shaking, and this person asks him, "Is it your first time killing someone?" And he says, "Yes." And so, just very interesting. That's the first time that he's done actual harm on somebody else.
Yep, exactly. And then, so we cut back now to Winterfell, where Bran, also the viewers, here I noted here, is having his history lesson with Maester Ludwin. I think it's Ludwin.
Yeah, something like that.
Maester Luwin.
Maester Luwin. Yeah. There we go. Okay. Which is nice because you kind of, as the viewers, are learning just a little bit more about the realm and everything like that, the different houses. The joke there is Maester Luwin points to House Lannister, and Bran says the motto is the Lannisters always pay their debts, and he kind of laughs at him. He's like, "No, that's a common misconception. That is not their house saying there or whatever."
Right. More allusions to the fact that the Lannisters just have a ton of money.
Yep. And you kind of get a little bit of anger from Bran that he's still upset about his mother having left Winterfell to kind of go south to King's Landing there. He thinks she should still be around. But then it's kind of nice here too. You get there's also a talk there of, I don't remember if it's Theon who gives it or if it's kind of talked about with Theon present there, but you get a little bit of a history of the Greyjoys and their kind of beliefs. Son of Balon Greyjoy and the Iron Islands, and just a little bit of stuff is peppered in there. Yep.
And then I think it continues with Theon and in the brothel, and I don't know, just kind of sort of starts, I don't know, kind of peeling back the layers of the onion that Theon maybe is kind of a dick and just like kind of sort of just exposition dumps about who the Greyjoys are and he was kidnapped and
Well, he's not kidnapped. He's a prisoner because the Balon Greyjoy, his father, who is the current ruler in the Iron Islands, just after Robert's rebellion and Robert was already well established as the new king, decided, nope, I want to try and be king, and attacked some of the Westerlands, attacked some of the Riverlands, and Robert and Ned and a couple others rode north and out to the Iron Islands to say, no, we're going to squelch this mini rebellion. I want to say 9-ish years ago in the storyline.
oh,
And they took Theon, who is Balon's son, as prisoner and gave him to Ned to say, if you try and attack our islands again, we will kill your son. And so Theon has this sort of weird juxtaposition where he is kind of at the Starks' request, but also he's kind of a prisoner. Like he's I think he has that interaction earlier on with John in the first episode where he said, he's mocking John. He calls him Snow, like we talked about, as that sort of a demeanor.
Theon
But just
is
all
his ward. But I guess I thought maybe Theon was his squire, but he's his ward.
he's his ward, they say. It's because he's actually a prisoner of of the Starks, so that Balon Greyjoy, his father, doesn't do anything.
But also, I think you get the sense that he has a strong relationship now outside this scene. Has a strong relationship with Robb, and I think Theon,
Yes.
Robb, and John are all approximately the same age.
Yeah, they're all the three. I mean, they grew up with each other. I think even in this episode, it's in that interaction in the brothel with the gal. I think her name is Roz or Ross. That Ross. They say that I've been with the Starks since I was 8 years old or something like that. So it's he kind of grown up with these other kids his age that like he's one of the kids or one of the brothers. Even though he has this sort of backstory of he's a prisoner.
I think it also tries to establish that the Starks are not mean people, and they hold no ill will towards Theon. They try to just bring him in, and he's part of the family, but he's just, it's more, I don't know, it's more that that's where he has to be, but they try to treat him as if he's a part of the community.
Absolutely. Tyler, feel free to rein us back in after this, but just one last thought on that too. Even later on, I think it's in this episode or maybe in the next one where they have the interaction with the wildling people, and they end up taking somebody again as prisoner, the Starks, back to the Winterfell. And Master Lewin has that same comment, well, she's our guest, and he's like, well, she's our prisoner. And Master Lewin says, are those two, do they need to be mutually exclusive? So yeah, they do sort of have this goodwill towards people that they shouldn't.
Interesting that you mentioned that.
Foreshadowing goodwill towards people when they shouldn't. Foreshadowing.
Okay. I guess the next, we've okay to move on. Next scene I see is Arya chasing cats.
So there's a scene that happens before that with Varys sitting down to talk to Ned, kind of trying to gauge Ned's character, and then they he tries to kind of deliver a warning to Ned about the king's life might be in danger, and then he kind of plants the thing of it's possibly Sir Hugh who poisoned Jon Arryn.
He mentions the Tears of Lys. Lys is an island south of the Free Cities on the other side of the Narrow Sea. So just, a reference to a very dangerous poison that's colorless and odorless, he said.
Tears of Lys. Is it Liz or Tears of Lys?
I don't know, LYS.
I don't worry about how shit's spelled in this show.
But a good interaction.
Yes.
So then, yes, we do get to your scene there, Gary, of then Arya is down chasing a cat around the castle as part of her dancing instructions, air quotes, dancing. And she makes it to the lower section of the area, and she comes across the dragon skull that is down there of, what's the large dragon, Nick?
Balerion the Black Dread.
Yep. Which is the dragon that Aegon rode over to Westeros originally from Valyria, right?
Correct.
Okay. But while Arya is down there, though, she happens to bear witness to Varys and it is Ilio meeting underneath the city. Ilio is the guy who was housing Danny and
Viserion.
Viserion at his
In
house in
Pentos, I think.
Pentos. Yep.
I didn't catch that until this watching that's who that was.
Right.
Because unless you can distinguish the voice, it's just kind of two shadowy figures, and I think you haven't heard Master Illyrio talk in a couple episodes, but you've heard Varys talk a lot more, so you can recognize his voice.
I mean, you kind of make out who it is there just a little bit if you pay just a like. It's just like one of those scenes of like, here's the fire torch, okay, faces, and then they're walking kind of into darkness and stuff like that. So
this scene is kind of foreshadowed in a later scene in the throne room, which, as I said, just something you catch on a rewatch. That the stranger from across the sea. So.
Yep, they're talking about the situation that's going on with Danny over there and how everything is progressing. And then the next scene is kind of a nice one here. These kind of come up every so often of Littlefinger and Varys are just standing in the throne room talking. And it's kind of just a great character interaction scene there of these two characters whose entire being within this world is built up around the ability that they're very smart people and they're very knowledgeable, not even like in the large sense of they know everything as far as like these plants do this and stuff like that, but in the knowledge of this person has done this person is out doing this, this person's secret, that person's secret. They are both kind of keepers of secrets in this world here, so they're just sitting there kind of trading barbs back and forth with one another.
Absolutely trading barbs. Yeah, I wrote down that was such a great interaction that we see. They're kind of joking with each other, like Varys jokes, "Oh, was that you under the bed? Ha ha ha!" But that like you can see in their nonverbals when they look at each other and talk a little bit that they're like surprised sometimes that the other person references something that like, how the heck would you know that, or you're not supposed to know that.
And also, like, there's a small sense of threatening, but they both are threatening each other. So I think they're both trying to make sure that they have enough dirt on each other that they know the other can't turn on them. Like, they both got their hands dirty, but like they haven't done anything to the other or like jeopardize each other's standing. So it's just where learning about where each of their lines are and what lines they will or will not cross.
Mm-hmm. I forget who asked it, but they're like, "We are friends, aren't we?" And it's kind of that, maybe not so much friends or comrades, but like, equals, or at least we acknowledge the other as a formidable foe.
Exactly. And then we cut to the small council chamber there where Ned has learned that his wife, Kat, has taken Tyrion prisoner and is working their way towards the Eyrie.
In the Eyrie, yeah.
And then also Robert kind of just starts getting real angry that he wants Daenerys Targaryen killed because apparently they're getting information that she's pregnant from a certain person named Jorah Mormont. We find out that Jorah Mormont is actually the spy keeping tabs on everyone over there.
Mm-hmm. We kind of see a little bit of this in an earlier episode where he says, "I have to go talk to somebody," when it's announced that Daenerys is expecting. And so it's kind of like you can kind of put two and two together, but it's explicitly stated here that yes, there is because I think Ned even reacts to it, that we hear some background on Jorah, and it's like, you take the word of a traitor, he betrayed his family, he's not a man of honor, I wouldn't trust what Jorah Mormont says.
Other people say he's not a traitor, like he's just he's a slaver. So
a slaver or something, yeah.
And then
I don't know if it's explained now of exactly what his crime was, but Jorah Mormont and the family of Mormont is actually a northern family. The Mormonts of Bear Island?
Yep. Yes, correct.
Yeah.
It's an island in the north, near where Winterfell is.
So, Ned is, I think, more offended to find out that this sort of treachery happens from a northerner who he holds in a high stand.
That's an interesting point.
Yeah, and Robert is just so motivated about trying to kill Daenerys there or whatever. He's just so set in his way that she has to die. And Ned, being the honorable person that he is, basically quits. He tells Robert he does not want to be Hand anymore, throws him his badge, and walks out of the room there. But then we kind of go back to the Eyrie now, though, and you're kind of.
I have one last little comment that I wanted to mention on this.
Okay.
In that, I forget who it is, but one of the council members, either Varys or Littlefinger, comments when they're talking about should they kill Daenerys or not. They all sort of jump to Robert's side in defense that she should die. One of them says, "Better the young Daenerys die now than thousands of innocents die later." And just interesting that's they're already trying to equate that this young Targaryen could raise an army and could come across the Narrow Sea. And as far-fetched as that sounds, this is kind of the fear that the Mad King had, is that the Mad King eventually wanted to just burn them all, kill them all. And so the fear that another Targaryen may follow in those footsteps is something that is enough to drive Robert to wrath and ruin what she's doing. Or at the very least, because he feels so much, as we've mentioned, for Lyanna Stark, that he just wants all Targaryens gone. So whatever his main purpose is there, I thought that line was just really interesting, that they jumped right to the worry that Daenerys could at some point down the line cause the death of multiple thousands of people.
And they're probably trying to rationalize it of this is how I can get around it in my head of if we kill her now, it may prevent the deaths of countless people later on.
The ends justify the means.
Yep. So again, we jump back to the Eyrie then, and we're introduced to Kat's sister, Lysa Arryn, who right from the beginning of just the introduction to her, you kind of feel she's a little off.
She's a little. Well, Tyrion says that too. He's like, "When was the last time you met your dear sister?" And he says she's gone a little mad. Yeah.
Yeah. So then kind of you get more shots of stuff inside the Eyrie there, and then Tyrion is taken to a prison cell of the Eyrie there, which is basically just 3 walls and then a giant opening with the room somewhat slanted there, so you can't really stay in one position lying down, because you will, if you roll over just enough, you will just roll yourself right out the side of the cell and just straight to your death.
Is it sky cells or
sky cell? Is what they call them. Yep. I also had a note too in that interaction with Lysa Arryn. We see that she's a little out there, but also she kept saying that Jon Arryn, her late husband, Hand of the King, kept saying the seed is strong, and that she was interpreting that saying. I wanted to make a note about that. She was interpreting that saying referred to their son, Robin Arryn, who is going to be Lord of the Vale, since he's the heir since his father passed away. But he's a young boy. He's only 6 or 7 or something. But his mother's madness has kind of warped him into, kind of a feckle, shallower, weaker person than who maybe he should be raised to be. He's very reliant on his mother. He's still being weaned from her at the age of whatever he is, which is just very, kind of one of those great Game of Thrones scenes where you're just like, oh yeah, that's normal. But just, that it's interesting because she clearly doesn't see that he is not the strong seed. And so again, kind of tying back to unraveling the mystery that Jon Arryn was trying to figure out, it's been referenced several times that he was saying things over and over again, like the seed is strong. What does that mean? And so, the seed is strong clearly does not refer to Robin, or you would think it would not. So what does the seed is strong mean? Sorry, foreshadowing. Keep going.
Wait, just just kind of a completely production thing I noticed when I rewatched that was when that scene is happening, it is one adult actor bearing what appears to be bearing a breast, and then a child actor sucking on that breast, and I was like, I wonder if they had to use a fake boob, because that seems like a weird child labor law sort of thing.
I'm sure it's a fake of some sort, yeah.
I was if you were related to this kid, maybe, but if you're just some random person, Like that
I'm
just
sure it's
seems
a
like a
prosthetic,
weird interaction to have with the child, even if you're getting paid for it.
right? Yeah.
But
All right.
anyway, moving forward.
All right, so we cut now to a scene of Renly and Loras Tyrell. We learn that those two are somewhat of an item here, basically.
Yes.
They are kind of talking about how Robert is a bad king, and Loras plants the idea in Renly's head that he should be king because he is beloved by everybody, whereas people don't like Stannis because Stannis is such a hard-nosed military man, and Robert is just a drunken fool now, basically, that he's just
Right.
not really worthy of the kingdom here, and that it should be Renly Baratheon, the one character we kind of know not that much about still.
They mentioned that Renly's not the greatest military person or tactician, soldier in general, and he's how squeamish he is. And yeah, the note I had about this has how quote unquote tender-hearted Renly. Loras, he's shaving him because he likes his mate to be clean shaven or something apparently. But as he's shaving him, he like slices him and says, "Look, see, we all have blood inside us." And Renly's like, "What have you done? You've cut me," you know. And it's showing him that you can live even if you're scarred. It's not the end of the world, and that you have to toughen up a little bit in this world. And so interesting that we kind of see a little bit in this episode of people trying to push the people around them outside their comfort zone. Catelyn Stark is trying to get her sister Lysa Arryn to kind of come to her aid, and she won't. Robert is trying desperately to get his hand to be on his side, and Ned won't. And in this scene, Loras is trying to get Renly to kind of toughen up a little bit, and he has his own hesitations.
Also, a note of just rewatching and deeper layers of what you know in politics.
Yep.
If Renly became king, that would supplant the Tyrells in the position that the Lannisters are in.
Absolutely.
Because they were the second richest, and I don't know if it's really well explained, but that would be a strong, not just a strong romantic move, but a strong political move for Lancel himself.
Loras
Himself, to move the Tyrells closer to the throne.
Yeah, it's a lot of like forward-thinking chess moves, basically there.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. We not trying to give too much away with foreshadowing, but we find out a little bit more about some of the other members of the Tyrell family, and some of the other members in the Tyrell family are also very cunning strategists. And so it could be that this is Laurel's thought to try and be something politically positive, or it could be something that the Tyrells are working with in general.
Thorns?
Maybe.
Okay.
Well, let's save that for a little later on, Gary.
Can neither confirm nor deny.
I can't even tell you when.
So next, then we get a scene which is probably one of the better scenes of the whole season 1. There of just two characters sitting down and talking to one another. Cersei and Robert basically sit down and have a conversation with one another, which is just kind of fantastic. There, it's kind of them talking about kind of like, the
Dothraki invasion, what holds the kingdom together, their marriage holds it together, and also it also kind of plays at the layers of like who Robert is, because he is a cunning warrior. And obviously in the conversation, it's like nobody knows. We haven't had a fight in years, like, because the Lannisters are very much gain power through politics, and Robert gained it completely through sheer will and might and war. And so he just also kind of gives the kind of puts the bar of where the Dothraki are in fear level, when you have the king, Robert Baratheon, is actually just afraid that he doesn't know when, but he knows that he can't they are a serious threat. And in his game, just trying to play 5 moves ahead, because, yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think something I wrote down in that conversation, one of the points, I mean, there's a lot of points, like Tyler, you were saying. Something that's really interesting is Robert asks Cersei sort of a tricked question about what's stronger, 1 or 5. And, one is actually the stronger because he shows 5 individual fingers and then makes a fist as the one when everything works together. And really, Robert's rebellion, he didn't win the Iron Throne by himself. It's because he had all these other people who came to his aid. And like we've mentioned Varys, we've mentioned Littlefinger, we've mentioned the Tyrells, and all these other people. Every person has their own agenda. Even Robert and Cersei. But when these groups align themselves with other groups, even if temporarily or with their own subterfuge, like they are dangerous forces to deal with. That these different families have their own agendas, and when they play coy or attempt to align themselves with other groups, that's when the real daggers come out.
Nick, maybe a history lesson. Where were the Tyrells in Robert's Rebellion?
The Tyrells participated a little bit in Robert's Rebellion. They are the ruling family in the Reach, which is south of Westerlands, way out to sort of the
If the
southwest.
Tyrells were part of the rebellion or part of, like, which side were they on? Were they on Robert's side or the Mad King's side?
Oh, that I'd have to do some digging on. I know that they played a part, but not a huge integral part. I want to say that since they're still part of they're still the ruling family, that they probably just held on to what they already had, that they were probably aligning themselves with the Targaryens. Let me do some digging. I'll find out. You can keep going.
So one point that is mentioned here, we kind of talked about this earlier in like the first episode, was just Cersei brought up. I think it was Cersei who brought up the baby again there that she had lost with Robert.
Like, what did you? When was the last? After we lost our first boy, there was love. Like, yeah, just sort of like, did you ever love me, or did I ever? Did she ever stand a chance? And it's like, no, honestly, you didn't stand a chance. But like,
Yeah, because this comes after Cersei breaks down, not really breaks down, but basically just finally says, "Okay, tell me about Lyanna here. Lyanna Stark, Robert's true love that he went to war over with her." And Robert says basically he can't even remember what she looked like anymore, but he still misses her. And he said the line of like, the whole of the 7 kingdoms couldn't fill the void left behind her, or something like that. But then, yeah, it went into that line then, Gary, of like, after they lost their first child there, she felt something for him at that time, but there was never going to be a chance between the two, basically, after that.
Right.
yes, and that was and that was actually when we rewatched it, realizing that it was mentioned twice, and Robert was in the room when it mentioned there was a boy before Joffrey that was lost. So that was like, oh, well, maybe this was, well, not necessarily book canon, but maybe TV show canon.
I think it's still canon to the whole thing there. I think I probably know what you're talking about there, of kind of something that is discussed a little later on here, but
Nick, are we good with the end of that scene and moving on to next as we're trying to chug a lug through this?
Trying to chug along. I've got a quick little sentence or two here I can read about what you had asked about, Gary, about the history for it. I'll be quick. The present Lord of Highgarden, that's the castle seat in the Reach of Highgarden, Mace Tyrell, that would be Loras's father, fought loyally for House Targaryen during Robert's Rebellion, defeating Robert Baratheon himself at the Battle of Ashford, and later besieging his brother Stannis in Storm's End for the better part of the year. With the death of the Mad King, Aerys II, and his son Prince Rhaegar, however, Lord Mace laid down his sword and is today once again Warden of the South and a leal servant loyal servant of King Robert and the Iron Throne.
Oh, okay. I was like, because the Tyrells are just somebody who, in the exposition dumps, you don't get
Right.
a lot of history on. So
Right. So yeah. So they fought for the Targaryens. So yeah, especially that too. The Lannisters, who Jaime Cersei killed Aerys Targaryen. And they had no love for the Targaryens, but the Tyrells fought for them. And that sentence you had earlier about, that the Tyrells would be in a better position than the Lannisters would be. Absolutely, since they sort of fought for the enemy or perceived enemy. Yeah, I wouldn't want them to have a higher station than me, than either.
So after that scene between Cersei and Robert, we move on to Ned meeting another bastard child of Robert's at one of the brothels there of Littlefinger's, I believe.
Wasn't it explained that this was the last, earlier on, but if you don't leave town by sunset, you can talk to the last person that...
Yes, that's why he was there.
Talked about before he died, so then you find out that this lady in the brothel was the last person that
John Arryn
talked to before he died or was
and
poisoned.
And it's a lady who has a little boy, black of hair, who they say, oh, it looks just like the king.
Yep. And then as Ned is trying to leave the brothel there, Jaime comes to escort Ned back because of the hostage situation that's going on between Catelyn taking Tyrion hostage there. And this is when a fight breaks out in the street between the Lannisters and the Starks.
Yep.
Which ends unceremoniously because as Ned and Jaime are getting ready to fight one another here, one of the Lannister soldiers stabs Ned in the leg there with a pike there, basically after Ned's whole house force has basically just been decimated right there real quickly. I mean, granted, they were outnumbered too.
Crazy.
Mm-hmm.
They were kill his men, but he needs to be alive. And you just see spikes or spears just fly across the screen, and people just get stabbed. Because he only has... earlier on, it's explained he says his number 2 in King's Landing, bring your best 2 swords. So there's only 3... It's only his 3 best swords with him.
Right.
So he's definitely outnumbered.
His number 2, Jory, was in a couple different scenes as someone he had asked him for questions and how's this going, or can you assist me with this? So he's a good companion of his. And Jaime stabs him through the eye with a dagger and then kind of gives a glance over at him, taunting him. I had written down just one really quick note on this fight that they have never crossed blades before, Jaime Lannister and Ned Stark, but both in their own right are very accomplished sword fighters. Jaime is a well-established knight, very prominent and well-known. He's on the King's Guard. But then also Ned Stark is the person who is fabled as killing the Dawn of the Morning, Sir Arthur Dayne, at the end of the Robert's Rebellion. So he's known as the person who killed the best sword fighter that is in the Seven Kingdoms. So it's a fight that I think that they're both interested to see who's the better. But a couple times you see Ned is a little taken aback at how good Jaime is, but Jaime also shows some hesitation too when he realizes this isn't an easy sword fight either. But then, as you mentioned, we don't get to find out who is the better as it's ended unceremoniously.
Classic, and it kind of feeds back to an earlier conversation in the throne room about how Ned never fights in tournaments. Right. Because when I fight a man, I don't want him to know what I can do. I want to... Exactly. Ned wants to be unintimidating in a fight so that he can take the upper hand and win just by surprise.
Correct.
And like I said, that ends episode 5 there, and we're going to jump over now to episode 6, A Golden Crown. Starts off with Ned awakening from the fight there, basically, and back into King's Landing's castle there. And Robert, Cersei, and I think Maester Pycelle, thank you. We're all there. And then there's just a small argument that starts between Robert and Cersei, and Robert ends up slapping Cersei.
Yeah. He just hauled off and smacks her. And I'll wear it with honor.
And Robert says back to her, "You'll wear it in silence," or something like that.
Or I'll honor you again.
Yeah.
Uh,
Again, we don't condone violence against women there.
We here at the Terrible Video Gamers Club do not condone violence.
It is a very, I don't know, very telling line that it just, everything had been kind of, it's been a stressful time for Robert because he just fought with his best friend, and then his best friend started more, everything's going to hell.
Yeah, well, I mean, he's trying desperately to just get over the pain that he has internalized in himself, but his external world is just as dark, and he has nothing. Like, he just lashes out and smacks her, but then instantly when she leaves the room, he goes, "I shouldn't have done that." Like, he knows that was a bit of a crossing a line for him.
Exactly. And then they kind of just basically have this argument, and Robert basically tells Ned, "You're going to put that badge back on and don't ever take it again, or I'll..."
Before that, I think there's a little bit of an exposition dump about more history between the two of them. Robert says, "You're the brother I chose. I didn't love my own brothers. You're the brother I chose."
Yep.
He has
And
zero
then
love
also
for Stannis and Renly.
Background, Nick, another random question.
Yeah.
Robert and Ned were squires together, childhood together?
Maybe that's the relation to John Arryn. They were squires to John Arryn.
Was it squires, or weren't they like taken in as not wards, but like studies to John Arryn, basically to kind of learn?
Maybe something. Yeah, learned how to be young lords, knights of their own with him.
Was that probably before the whole Ned's
Rebellion.
father and brother getting burned alive, or was that?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
I didn't know if Ned got taken in because his family got burned alive.
Nope. His mother and his sister Lyanna were still alive. Well, I guess Lyanna was kidnapped by Rhaegar Targaryen, and then when it was his brother and his father went to go talk to the Mad King Aerys about what his son had done to their family. Then the Mad King burned his father and his brother alive. So it was just those two who were attacked.
Anyway, I was just curious because I thought that was the case, but anyway, we can move forward from there.
But yeah, Ned is basically then forced to put the badge back on, and he's going to rule the kingdom for a bit while Robert goes out hunting. And then we go back over to Daenerys while she is sitting there staring at her eggs in her tent, and it's like you kind of feel like there's some connection she's kind of got between the eggs and kind of her, where for whatever reason she just wants to watch the world burn. For some reason, she picks up one of the eggs and sets it down in the fire, and then she just stares at it for a little while, and then she goes to pick it back up, and one of her handmaids sees that she's doing this. She's like, "No, Daenerys, don't do that. It's hot." She goes to slap it away from Daenerys, and it burns the maid's hands, but then they look at Daenerys' hands, and her hands are not burned by the egg, and you're like, well, okay, that's kind of weird. What happened there?
Foreshadowing.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe foreshadowing. Then we go over to Bran is now having a dream again here about a raven going into the crypts underneath Winterfell. And I
just mentioned again, we see this three-eyed raven of some sort that Bran keeps seeing. Just something or someone is trying to speak to him about something.
And then it is now off to Robb and Theon are kind of out discussing combat in the woods while Bran is out riding around on his horse with the saddle that was designed by Tyrion while he was there. And then all of a sudden, while Theon and Robb are sitting there talking about combat, excuse me. Oh, sorry.
You're good. I had too that there's another one of those conversations about, like we were talking about, Theon's kind of this, a loud outcast. They mention again, it's not your house to Theon when he's talking about I should do something about defending my house or for the honor of my house. And Robb says to Theon, it's not your house. And then Theon kind of shoots it back to him in a later reply where he says, I don't know, it's not my house.
Oh, Bran, I can't hear him. Oh, well, that's not my problem, because Bran, this isn't my house.
Yep.
So Bran runs into some wildlings that are fleeing south, so they have made it somehow past the wall and are continuing to head south, basically, to get out of the north. And they try to hold him hostage, where Robb kind of arrives for the save there, because they were trying to pull Bran off the horse, Robb arrives, takes one of them out, and then he's got the gal wildling hostage while the other one has Bran, basically. And then from nowhere, basically behind him, Theon takes the kill shot, basically, with the wildling that has Bran hostage there and kind of saves the day. And then the female wildling is sitting there begging for her life to not be killed, and Robb ends up sparing her.
I think we find out later her name is Asha.
Yep. I don't think we actually find out for a little while here.
I did write down, too, that's also the first mention we hear from the wildlings, or maybe the second mention overall in the show, but the mention of the name Mance Rayder.
Raider?
Yep.
Raider, something like that.
Yep.
So, another one of those characters we have yet to hear about.
And then
Maybe.
But then we go back to Tyrion in the Eyrie where he nearly rolls out of his cell this time here. He rolls over, arm off the edge, and then he wakes up and goes, "Oh boy, I just about fell out of here." And he tries to bribe the jailer there.
Mord.
Cut back to King's Landing there where Arya is still doing training. And this is all... Oh, this is where...
Her dad is still recovering.
Yep.
And there's just lots of crazy... And so that's when the dance master talks about there's only one God. There's death. And when you say to death, you say not today.
Yep.
Because
I wrote that line down too. It's really interesting.
If you're with your troubles, you'll have more troubles.
What did we say to the God of Death? Not today.
Looks like Tyler maybe stepped away. So I guess the next scene. Did you have anything else on that scene, Nick? Otherwise, the next scene I have is eating.
Just that his name is Serial Fornell or something like that. Florell or something.
You're terrible with names. I think you're trying to look at how they're spelled. You just phonetic the hell out of it.
And so I just wrote down that he's teaching her how to dance with the sword, but like he brings her back to the reality too, which is just a great when you're in King's Landing, be in the moment. Like there's so much backstabbing, so much things that will drag you down mentally. You have to stay in the moment if you're still going to stay in the sword fight. And that theology in the greater sense, if you want to win this fight, you have to keep staying alive. You have to play the game. I thought was very telling. That's all I had. After that, I have something else about going back over to Daenerys.
Yep. So we move back over to Daenerys, and she is in Vastelthrak eating a horse heart raw as part of a Dothraki ritual. And I had a note here to just kind of look that up of like, what was it that she actually ate? And it looks like, according to her, she was given a heart, air quotes, made of solidified jam, but which tasted like bleach and raw pasta. And apparently she had to eat through about roughly 28 of those things throughout the days while they filmed that scene.
Crap.
Thankfully, they gave her a spit bucket because she was vomiting in it quite a bit.
I just assumed it was like made of like a gummy bear material because it looked very, I don't know, leathery.
This was early on in the show. They didn't have the great budget to do that. They had only bleach and whatever you just read there.
Horse heart.
Exactly.
So throughout the scene, though, Viserys, her brother, seems quite nervous about what's going on there. And then this is where we get the line that her child is going to be the stallion who mounts the world. And she's decided to name her child Rhaego after her brother, Rhaegar.
Mm-hmm.
And you really kind of see that Dany is just kind of more and more stepping into her role as being queen of the Dothraki.
Khaleesi.
The great Khaleesi. And then it kind of Varys leaves and the scene.
Loved by everybody.
Yep.
Like, there's that scene where Viserys. You're going to talk about it here. Viserys is like he's seeing people are chanting for her and hugging her, and Khal Drogo comes up and is like holding her above everybody else, and slowly she's being put on more and more of a pedestal in the role that she has, and he's just sort of slips into the background. Sorry, continue.
And then Viserys is basically seen kind of cut to he leaves, and then he's trying to go into Dany's tent to steal the eggs from her because he knows they are worth a small fortune, and he's thinking he can use that money to then go buy ships and a sailor to go buy ships and an army. That's what I'm looking for here.
One dragon will buy me a ship. Two dragon eggs will buy me a ship and an army. And it's like, why do you need 3? Because I need a very large army.
Yep.
Yes.
And this Jorah Mormont basically steps in to stop him from doing that here.
It's also the first time that Jorah really stands up to Viserion. Like in the past, he's kind of been Viserion's go-to when he's asking, "How do I work with the Dothraki? How do I do this with the Dothraki? Or tell the Dothraki this." And now Jorah literally stands in his way.
But maybe going back to the previous conversation about finding out that Jorah is the
Secret spy contact.
secret spy, is that maybe he's kind of buddies himself up with the Targaryens so that if there's things going on, he's in the know. So
Oh, absolutely.
he's like, instead of just being a spy in general, he's like, I'm the spy that's with the Targaryens. So like, he just needed to wait until he had the opportunity, because he knew that Viserys wanted to get an army, but as soon as Viserys had an army, he could immediately pass along the information and probably stab him in the back from the inside. Like, why? Like, if there was a best place to like be a traitor, it's on the inside.
Well, of course, yeah. It's always easy to betray somebody when you have the inside. I think that's the role of any translator, is that you know the customs, you know the inside tells of when something is going south. Because Jorah makes several mentions about well, the Dothraki always do this, or this is what it means when they don't cut their hair, or they braid their hair a certain way because of this. Like, he knows the customs of what they're doing. So as Jorah can tell, just as we the audience are telling or learning, that Dany's becoming more and more poised to be in a place of power. She's gaining more and more respect from the Dothraki. I think Jorah can kind of tell that Viserys is never going to lead these people. Like, maybe he might have been, at one point, but now, like, he sees that's futile. And so, yeah, being in the place of transition between both, he knows what Viserys is asking is not ideal, and what the Dothraki are doing and what's they're accustomed to, it's much more that I should align myself this way. So has that gumption to then stand up to them.
He the more time he I think he gets introduced to him at the wedding, and the more time you're Viserys, he can tell that Viserys is not going to be successful, so he's not going to hitch his wagon to that star.
Right. I had a comment too that I wrote down, the naive of Viserys. I was telling Tyler about this a little bit in the beginning before we started recording. Just when I first watched through these episodes, you kind of have that unknown and that fear of, oh, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? Now going back on this, you can kind of see. I wrote down, I almost feel kind of sad for Viserys, because he's so bought into that his right to rule is his birthright, and it's just it's going to happen. Like, how could it not? But as you watch these early episodes and sort of the events that lead up to this episode is the Golden Crown, so we know how this ends. We're going to talk about it here. You kind of see this buildup that what you're doing is not the best way to get what you want. And the naive of just thinking, well, I can keep bossing these random nomadic horse lords around because they don't know any better. Like, are you, it's the same thing that we see later on with Ned. It's like, that is not the best choice to be making in this situation. It's like they just keep thinking that everybody's going to think the way I think. And rather than, quote unquote, play the game or listen to the tells that other people are giving, these custom signals like we were just talking about, you just keep going, blundering down your path, and it does not end well for you, as we see in the end of this episode.
Also, history of family mental illness. Which
absolutely right. Yeah, the Mad King. I want them all burned. I want this.
Is a sign for later, but
I want my golden crown. I want to be in charge.
Yes. Any other thoughts on that? Otherwise, we can move forward to the next scene of Tyrion.
Let's go to the next scene.
Crimes. So Tyrion convinces Maud that is like, I'm a Lannister. Like, he always pays his debt. Like, all you need to do is get a message, and then it's like, I want to confess my crimes. And the whole court gets adjourned for him to confess, and it's kind of this flip where everyone assumes he's gonna confess to trying to murder, and he just goes down this wild rampage of like just trying to like I don't know.
What do you think? What do you think his purpose is there? Right? Is he just like killing time till he thinks the Lannisters or his brother will save him, or what?
And make it so that he still has the floor to communicate. So he needs to like, oh, I'm going to confess my crimes, and that's what he's doing. But if he like just says I didn't do it, they were like, oh, you're gone. And so he goes on a crazy tirade. I think he maybe as a member of the audience, I think you kind of realize that he like you kind of start rooting for him because you know that you don't as with things in Game of Thrones, you don't know for sure that he was involved, but you haven't seen anything real concrete that he was involved, and you kind of start to root for him. Also, the favorite part of that whole scene is I once brought a jackass and a honeycomb into a brothel, and then just like, that's it. And then in the background, you see the son,
the young son of the like the Lord person,
son, say,
Robin.
What happened next?
Oh,
That was just like the best punchline on a rewatch is that it's just a little hidden line. Is that as the mother starts talking, you just hear Robin Aaron say, next.
He's bought into the story that he's selling. That's awesome.
Maybe that was part of it too, is that like ultimately he was previously told that like Robin Aaron is the Lord of the Eyrie. So that's who he needs to get on his side. So maybe he just goes down crazy, like immature, like humor to try to win over a teenager.
That could be. I like that ideology. He's trying to just tell these ridiculous stories because he thinks maybe that's what the young Lord Aaron would be interested in.
And then who will be my champion? Who will be your champion?
Right. I marked down. This is the first time we hear that trial by combat is a thing, because they talk about like they say he's guilty. They open up the moon door and say that his punishment will be he'll go through the moon door, which is just a hole in the floor of this gigantic castle on a cliff, and you just fall forever. And they say, well, he can ask for trial by combat, and then they all agree. So it's something that's recognized. It's not just like this far-fetched thing that of the past. It's a legitimate
customs, regional custom.
Yeah. Regional custom, yeah. You can just say, I demand trial by combat, and everyone's like, okay, fine. We'll watch two people fight and determine your guilt or innocence.
Yeah.
And so everyone says that, yeah, okay, we'll fight for your innocence, and people say that they'll fight for that he's guilty, and people will jump to attack him, because it's kind of determined that, like, that you would be the fighter. So everyone thinks, okay, we're going to beat Tyrion. He's half man. He's really easy to take out. We'll fight for him. And all these knights step forward. And Lysa Arryn says, picks out one particular knight of hers, Vardis, who is sort of like the well-trained knight that she has. And he says, I would happily fight for your honor. And so he steps forward as that person. And Tyrion's kind of just like, well, I don't have anyone for me. Who would fight for me? And finally, this is where one man steps forward, and we find out that it's this character he knew on the road named Bronn. And Bronn says that he will fight for him.
Well, actually, before that, yeah, Bronn was a sellsword. But before that, though, Tyrion actually wanted his brother Jaime to be called to come to the Eyrie.
That's right. But he says, I nominate Jaime Lannister to fight for me.
But then Lysa says, no, the trial has to happen today. And that's when Tyrion kind of looks around and says, who will fight for me? And that's when Bronn steps forward and says, I'll do it.
On the rewatch, too, like you were just mentioning, Gary, I was thinking to myself, he doesn't get any bites when he says that. And so then he offers money, but he doesn't. Bronn steps forward before he says, I'm a Lannister, I'll pay you. Lannister always pays his debts, whatever. And so Bronn steps forward before he hears of money. Certainly he knows who Tyrion is and knows that he's worth a lot of money, and maybe he's doing it out of the reward for his money. But there's almost a sense of, I think, respect that he has for Tyrion, that he's willing to, he has the gall to demand trial by combat, or that he has the the contempt to tell his ridiculous quote unquote confession story, to the court. It's interesting that he steps forward before money is mentioned, almost as if Braun or this random sellsword isn't doing it for the money.
Well, also he's a self. Literally just means like he is not. He doesn't have loyalty to a lord or a certain house. He just his services are up for sale. He doesn't have any loyalty. So I'm sure for Braun, it's just literally like I could beat this guy, like, and he probably just sees the value in Tyrion, like, and knows that like he knows that there's a certain weakness in the way they fight, sort of like the Dothraki talk about the men in armor. I forgot how they explain it.
He calls them the men in metal dresses or something like that.
Iron suits.
Iron suits, iron dresses.
Yeah. We can move on from that. And then the fight is actually a little later in that.
Yeah. So what happens then next is just a cut to Robert's hunt, basically, where him, Barristan Selmy, Renly, and Lancel are basically walking through the woods, and Robert's talking about those were the days or something like that. He has a little squabble
making the 8.
Yeah, he has a little squabble with Renly, and then he talks about making the 8, and then it kind of cuts with that scene of being done there. Then it goes to Ned's council / the court session there, where him being the acting Lord Regent, right? Is that what he's called?
Mm-hmm.
He's kind of listening to those villagers kind of talk about how their houses were raided recently and everything was burned, raped, murdered by Gregor Clegane there. And this is where Ned sends Lord Beric Dondarrion he sends him basically out to bring in Gregor Clegane basically for crimes against the crown, and strips Gregor Clegane through official acts basically of him being a knight anymore.
He talks a little bit about
different actor changes. I think it's a different actor.
Correct.
I think he literally just steps forward and he says, yes. Like, I don't think he even has a full line. Just like, yes.
He mentions, the people who say their house is being burned. They're like, well, who is doing it? And they sort of find out it was it's the person who's describing sounds like it's Gregor Clegane. And like, why would Gregor Clegane be attacking these random houses in River Run in the Riverlands? And I think it's Peter Baelish who points out, he's like, do you know of any reason why Gregor Clegane, again, who we mentioned earlier, works for Tywin Lannister? Do you have any reason that you can think of why the Lannisters would be mad at Catelyn Tully, the Riverlands' homeland? And so, hinting at, well, duh, because you have his son, Tyrion, caught at the Eyrie. And so, again, just kind of ties back to, you can see that this person who we still haven't met yet, Tywin Lannister, is a person of retribution, a person of power, a person of wealth, a person of vengeance, a very dangerous person to mess with. I took away from that as well. They say yanking the lion's tail in referring to don't mess with Tywin and Gregor Clegane.
So then we cut back to now, this is the trial by combat fight between Bronn and the Knight of the Vale there, which goes on for just a little while, but once you kind of realize what's happening in the fight here of Bronn is basically just kind of moving around, dodging this guy's attacks just because this guy is in full armor. Bronn is not. And he realizes basically he keeps just moving around and dodging him. The guy just slowly starts getting tired and more tired till he finally slips up a few times here or there, gets sliced underneath the arm, sliced in the back of the legs. Then finally Bronn basically takes him down and puts the sword through him and sends him through the moon door, and Tyrion is free to go.
I did notice that even though Bronn didn't fight honorably, he did sort of stop to get the approval of the Lord or the King. So he stops, like he's got the guy's arm up, he's got the sword next to the guy's neck and arm, and he looks up and he looks around and basically saying like, okay, like, this is a trial by combat, like, this is the verdict. We're taking
Pe-
a pause. This is the verdict.
people
And
start shouting, "Mercy, mercy, save him!" And so it to me that means that some people do say that, like they'll show mercy and maybe just let the person win, even though it's not to the death. But the fact that he carried on, yeah, no,
maybe it could be decided like if he looks at Lord Rob and Aaron could say, "Okay, you won," and by saying "Okay, you won," then
And we lost Gary.
he froze mid conversation there.
But yeah, just to kind of, Robin basically condoned the killing there, so the knight was killed. And then Tyrion basically gives Maud the bag of gold that he had promised him, and then they both walk out the front door and leave there.
The first thing he does is, Lannister always pays his debts.
Yep, I wrote down Lannister always pays his debts.
The next thing I had down was Ned talking to his daughters. Is that what you got?
Nope, actually there's a scene that happens slightly before that there of Sansa is sitting there with her septum, and they're talking about how her septum points out how Sansa is all of a sudden starting to adopt these more southern customs, and also at the same time being a very annoying little teenage girl there of kind of talking back to her septum.
But then, again, naive.
Yes. But then Joffrey shows up to give Sansa a gift, and I put down he does this bullshit wooing of Sansa there, basically, of saying how she's his lady and all of that stuff.
Exactly. Yeah, he said something like, I promise I'll never do anything cruel to you ever again. And, my eyes just roll, because even pretending I don't know what I know about having seen the whole rest of the show, you just kind of like, he was so violent earlier, and it shows that he's prone to negative comments and
outbursts.
Yeah, it's clearly he's not going to be a good person.
I feel like Nick, if you put blinders on to what you know later, I think in the grand scheme of things, the amount of dialogue that Joffrey Baratheon has up to this point is fairly limited. So I think up to this point, I would assume he's still genuine, and it's trying to like massage back to an earlier episode where like there is genuine like kind of puppy love between them.
Maybe straightly in like a physical way, but I don't think he cares for her at all. I mean, we had that conversation in the last 4 episodes where he said, he was gonna just start a war and destroy all of the Northerners, and the Starks are just all terrible people. So I don't think he really feels much for Sansa particularly.
I think there's been just slightly enough. Like you're right, Gary. There hasn't been all that much talking from Joffrey in these kind of earlier episodes, but I think there's been just enough that kind of points towards he's a spoiled brat who kind of quickly turns to anger and hostility when things don't seem to be going right.
Just immature,
immature too. Yes,
immature. Absolutely.
It's just and yeah. Anyway, I would just say it. I don't feel like you can completely throw the book at him. I don't think it was manipulative. I think it was just like earlier on, it's like you should do something nice for the Stark girl, like. Maybe just sort of taking him a while to get to, you should do something nice.
Mm-hmm.
Especially knowing up to what you know at this point, just locking the vault beyond that. Her dad just got fucking stabbed. Like, he's like walking with a cane. Like things are kind of turbulent, and maybe that's when you try to be nice to people. But anyway, not important in the grand scheme of life.
I don't think with the information we know right now, we could say that he's a dangerous person. It's just I don't think he's very kind.
Correct. Yeah, that's probably a better way to phrase it. Then we cut to just a small scene of Theon coming across the cart of that mistress, basically leaving the north, basically, and heading south to do more work down there. And I just want to kind of point out, like, she has a great line there. She talks about, like, she feels there's a war coming, basically, and it'll be more business and action down south than there would be up north.
Correct.
So then Now it cuts to the scene basically of Ned talking to his girls there. Again, Sansa is just kind of being that teenage girl of just like I I think this is where
I
they
want to
said,
marry Prince
yep,
Joffrey, him marry him and have his kids.
I love him and all of that stuff. So,
Seven hells.
but then
Again, the disparaging difference between Sansa and Arya.
yep. So then though she utters a line though that kind of just sparks something in Ned when Sansa says she wants to have Joffrey's babies and all of their golden hair, and Ned's like
Yep.
golden hair, and it just kind of
She says, I love Joffrey. He's nothing like his father.
yep. Well, that's not the So that he's not like his father. She wants to have his babies and raise them with their golden hair. It's like specifically the golden hair part that
Yep.
like after
And
that
it, like,
triggers
finally
the
flips in his head.
yep. So then Ned basically sends the kids out of the room and he opens up the great house book there of families of the realm there, and in there it talks about how House Baratheon like he's going through reading about the House Baratheon, and it's like so and so dark hair, so and so hair of black, dark hair, and then Joffrey Baratheon golden hair, and then it's like trigger warning alarm bells go off, and it's like something's not right here.
One of these things is not like the other.
Okay, going back like to the Sansa, just a question of like, do you think that between Joffrey's parents, Sansa respects the Lannisters more than the Baratheons? Sort of the opposite of what Ned does. Ned respects the Baratheons more than the Lannisters because the Baratheons are tested war veterans, and the Lannisters are very like just manipulative. But to Sansa, like a girl, they're so elegant and so graceful. Like that's everything she loves about Joffrey, is that he's so elegant and graceful, and like he's a Lannister at heart, not like a mean old Baratheon.
Right.
Yeah, I think there's definitely like a little somewhat of a wedge between her and her father, whether it's kind of put there on purpose or she's just being an angsty teenage girl, like she wants to somewhat rebel against her father. So next we move on to the final scene of this episode of the Dothraki having a celebration in that big tent for Khaleesi there, and Viserys comes marching in there, basically stumbling. He's drunk, and
he's drunk.
He threatens Dany and the baby, and he wants his crown now, which is a very no thing to do because he has a weapon in Vaes Dothrak, which is very, very against the Dothraki culture as well. And also threatening the Khaleesi with her husband sitting there too is also a big no. So
it was telling. I had marked down that the first thing she says is not, "Oh my gosh, this guy's beyond saving. Get rid of him. Kill him." She says to Jorah, "Get him out of here." Like she still feels enough for her brother at the beginning of this scene that she knows that maybe we can still save him somehow for his own safety. Get him out of here.
Yep. Then Dragon says he's going to give him. Sorry, not Dragon. Drogo says he's going to give Viserys his crown. Ends up like snapping his arm or something like that, and then his two men come and hold him basically, and then Drogo takes a bunch of gold, basically empties a pot out, throws the gold into there, and it starts to melt and stuff. Comes back over with this pot of gold and dumps it on Viserys' head there, basically turning his head into basically a golden crown. He screams in agony as it is slowly...
I get it now.
That's funny how that works. No, Gary. No. Killing him basically from the just extreme heat, and I'm sure the gold just melting through his skull and killing him there.
Right.
And then
there's a nice clink when he falls to the ground.
Yep. And then there's a line uttered, I think, by Jorah there of like the dragon is dead or whatever. And Dany says, "No, not a dragon. Fire cannot kill a dragon." Episode ends.
Right. Which was just a tie back to when she was playing with eggs at the beginning of the fight. At the beginning of the episode, the fire doesn't burn her, but clearly the warm heat and fire do hurt Viserys. Yeah.
All right.
Again with Viserys, I commented here again too, sort of that naive and almost I feel sad for it because you see there's like a moment when Jorah translates for Drogo, he says, "We'll give you your golden crown now," and like Viserys almost like tears up. He's like, "Really? I'm gonna get what I want?" Yeah, and it's like everything's gonna come true for me, and like it's my turn finally. It's like this so naive that you're surrounded by these brutal nomadic horse lords, and you think, yeah, they're gonna kowtow to you. Of course, yeah, they have your best interests in mind, especially after you come in and threaten his child. It's like it's not knowing what's going to happen going into that episode and seeing it for the first time, but having seen it already and looking back on it, it's just so sad because you can tell this is all he has ever wanted. And because he's so naive in how to quote unquote play the game, he's doomed from the start. He's never going to get what he wants. And it's going to end very poorly because he's doing it in a very self serving way rather than trying to do it with subterfuge.
You think there's an illusion that, like, I think all the gold that Drago melts is literally like he just takes all his belt of golden trinkets, and he just melts all of it. Like, it means nothing to him. Like, if this is what he wants, like, you can have this. Like,
Yeah.
it, like, to him, family and honor, like, was much more important in that moment. Like, if this is what you fucking want, gold, fuck you. I'll throw it in your face.
Absolutely, right? You know, if this is what's so important to you, then this is what you'll get. That old thing of be careful what you wish for. So that's all I got. Sorry. All right.
Anyway, we should roll.
Yep.
Next
Moving on.
Episode 7. You win or you die. All right, I have just right down here, right at the beginning, we are finally introduced to Tywin fucking Lannister, basically there,
He's a pleasant guy.
He is something else there, basically, and you're introduced to him in the greatest kind of.
Weird. Which the actor actually did.
Yeah,
and he knows how to do.
Great.
It's a real stag.
It's just so much symbolism right there, basically, of he's sitting there skinning a stag, basically, a dead stag. Stag, House Baratheon. He is the lion. And he's just... It's such a great moment because he's sitting there talking to his son, Jaime. They're kind of trying to impart some more of his wisdom and knowledge upon his son as he thinks he needs to do to try and get him ready to take over for when he eventually dies. But he talks about kind of like how the lion doesn't concern itself with the opinions of sheep. Nick, can we get a little bit about the background of House Lannister here?
Yeah, so House Lannister, again, they're the Wardens of the West. They come from Casterly Rock is their house seat, which is just this gigantic mountain that's been carved into the form of a lion, multiple different nooks and crannies. It's not a castle perched on a mountain. It's like the mountain is the castle. It's Casterly Rock. And what's interesting about the way it's designed is that there's so many little nooks and crannies and places underneath the mountain that there's actually a backstory there with some of the other houses that have similar carvings out in the hillsides of Casterly Rock, where families have. That's half the reason why they're so rich is because in digging out these mountains, they found all this gold and gem work underneath the mountains, and so then that's half the reason why the Lannisters have so much money, have the best weaponry, have the best everything because they're digging out all these precious gems, ores, metals from underneath the mountains. As far as Tywin goes, he was very close to Aerys II. Like we talked a little bit about the Mad King and the backstory there. Tywin was very, very close, very good friends with Aerys II. But as Aerys II Targaryen became more and more the Mad King, he just did everything he could to go out of his way to torment his old would-be friend Tywin. And when Tywin had a beautiful wife, Joanna, I think, or something like that, Lannister. It was, oh, well, she gets the best wife, and my wife gives me dead babies. Like, I can't have kids, because all Aerys II could ever get were stillborn kids from his wife. And then finally, he gets two beautiful twins, Cersei and Jaime Lannister. And he's like, well, what the crap there? He gets beautiful twins. Everything works perfectly for Tywin, and he's shit's gold, is what they always say. And then finally, Tywin has Tyrion Lannister. And when Tyrion is born, he's malformed. And he actually tears his mother when he's born, and Joanna bleeds out, and so his wife is dead. And there's a line in this book that references that when Aerys II heard about what had happened to Tywin, he said he has taken a rose. The old gods have taken a rose from Tywin and given him a monster in her place. And he makes some kind of reference about this is what you deserve for being so proud and haughty, which maybe Tywin was, but just that, the world revolves around you and you're so great. And Aerys II sort of fell into madness himself, probably some jealousy, some anxiety at his friend who he was close to, but seemingly so that the world revolved around Tywin. When this happened to him, he made reference to, haha, kind of your wife is dead with that comment. And that was the straw that broke his back, where Tywin said, I quit. I'm no longer your hand. And so Tywin is removed from the Targaryen events until the end of the rebellion, when he famously rode back into King's Landing, and Aerys II thought, oh, great, my good friend Tywin is back here to help me. And we find out he's actually here to depose you. And when Aerys II found out his enemies were finally falling in around him, he said, burn them all. And that's when Jaime Lannister did what he thought was best for the realm, and his own Kingsguard sent there to protect him, stabbed him in the back. So Tywin is a bitter person. He had essentially a lot of things going for him, and then his wife died. And now he's stuck with Tyrion, who Tyrion himself says, all dwarves are bastards in their father's eyes. And so there's angst there, clearly from the conversation that Tywin has with his son Jaime in this scene. He's trying desperately to tell him the only thing that matters is the family legacy we leave. Soon I'll be dead. Soon all we'll have is your sister and your brother. Everything that matters about anything is this: if we're allowed to be attacked with impunity, then we have nothing. And so he's bitter. He's proud. He's very, very, very vengeful. And Tywin is this person who has the means and the power to do what he wants. Clearly, from these accusations that Gregor is running around killing people on his behalf, he has the ability, the capacity, and has already been committing atrocities in the sake of vengeance. So he's a very dangerous person. How we were just talking about Joffrey, Tywin is a dangerous person, and we see that, like you just said, Gary. He's cutting up a cadaver with a knife the first time we see him. And so it's a very symbolic gesture that this is somebody who cuts right to the heart to get at his enemies. So it's not a person to mess around with.
Anyway, any other thoughts on that scene?
Yeah, thank you, Nick. That was a lot of good backstory there about Tywin, because he is definitely like a major player in this universe here. But kind of throughout this whole scene, though, he is giving this pep talk to Jaime. Basically, he still doesn't feel that Jaime is the person he needs to be the head of House Lannister when Tywin is gone. So he kind of ends the pep talk with it. He wants Jaime to basically take half of the army and go. I forget exactly what, but kind of go do this and kind of step up and become the man he needs to be the ruler of House Lannister.
Right.
So next, though, we've got great scene here of Ned talking to Cersei, and he kind of tips his hand a little bit too far, possibly here, of revealing to Cersei that he knows that Cersei and Jaime basically are lovers here, pretty much. And Cersei comes out and basically confirms it to him, and that the kids probably aren't Robert's here. And Ned basically gives her the opportunity to leave, to basically pack up and leave before Robert comes back here.
Because Ned knows that Robert will burn the fucking house to the ground when he finds out, like, all Cersei's dead, all those kids are dead, Tywin Lannister, like, is gonna end up dying, like, shit's gonna go sideways for House Lannister, and they need to get the fuck out of there until Robert cools down. because it's going to be a shitstorm for a couple weeks.
Mm-hmm.
So then, though, too, you get the great line from Cersei there about when you play the Game of Thrones, you win or you die. There are no middle grounds.
Yep.
We cut then to just a small scene here of Peter Baelish in his brothel with his new whores. One of them is the gal from the north, and I'm going to continue to not remember her name.
Ross.
Anyway, he yeah, very good scene about how he talks about who he loves and like that he's not a incestuous man, even though he's around whores all the time. He's like he has goals in his mind, and he's saving himself for like someone
who we all know is Catelyn by the story that he tells there, pretty much.
Yeah, the story was very interesting. He has
very telling about how he like I don't know. He breaks down some really like weird psychology of whoredom.
Well, he also then talks to like about like the game that he plays versus how everyone else plays a different game.
Right, I'm never going to beat them at their game, he said.
Yeah, he's never going to beat them in like a combat situation. There, he is outplaying the game basically of knowledge is power, and maneuvering himself that way.
He has a line. He says, "Only by admitting what we are can we get what we want."
So next we go back up to Winterfell here, and this is the scene where Theon is walking into the he's sort of like hitting on / flexing on the wildling gal that they have taken prisoner there.
Yep.
He kind of explains how things are while kind of being a little shithead about it, of, you know, calling him my lord and all of that stuff. And she doesn't understand, obviously, because this is not the world that she grew up in. But then she kind of talks about how, like, why they're fleeing south with, like, Master Luwin eventually steps in and kind of, he sees what Theon might be kind of ultimately heading towards there and kind of kicks him out there. And then Master Luwin talks with the gal about, like, why did you come this far south? It's because the long night is coming. Ominous tones.
Right. Exactly. And she mentions White Walkers again. Like, they were sleeping, but they're not sleeping any longer.
Yep. Then we go up to our boys, Jon and Sam, back at the top of the wall there, where they're just kind of overlooking there, having a conversation. And all of a sudden they notice riders are coming back, but it's actually just a horse that's coming through the wilderness coming back here. And Sam yells out real quickly, "We need to blow the horn once for rangers returning, 2 times if it's wildlings," and they don't specify what the 3rd time is. It cuts off before then.
They explain. I thought they say the 3rd time is for whites.
Maybe that's later on. You just blew it.
Later on.
You just blew it all up, Gary. This podcast is over now here. Next, we go into Ned is just having a conversation there at King's Landing with somebody. I think it's like one of those announcing guys of the court, and then Renly comes running in, basically announces that Robert had an accident while hunting. The boar basically got him. And let's see here. It's basically then Ned kind of comes to Robert's side there, and they sit down and have a conversation. They kick everybody out of the room there. Yeah, they kick everybody out of the room there, and Ned gets kind of basically appointed to be Lord Regent until Joffrey comes of age. And now Robert has also had a change of mind. He wants Dany to live. And then he just says something, kind of just a meme quote there, just like, "Give me something for the pain and let me die." But you can kind of... Oh, go ahead.
You're good. You finish yours now, though.
I was just going to say, then it's back to Ned talking to Sir Barristan Selmy there, basically. And you could just tell the look on Selmy's face there. He's just so distraught about what happened. He feels like he let everybody down by letting the king get attacked like that.
Very good point. Very good point. I wrote down 2. Is this where he asked to write down his sort of last will and testament? That little bit there?
Before he leaves the room, Robert asks him to take down the last will and testament, and then he seals it, and he leaves the room, and then I think when Ned leaves the room, Sir Barristan and Renly are there, and then I think the family kind of goes in, and Ned tells him to give him milk of the puppy, and then everyone else is having a conversation in the hallway about how did this happen? Like, just trying to get more info than, this guy's. We've already talked to the guy that's injured. Like, now I just want to hear your side of the story.
Trying to again on Ned's like blind honor. When Robert's giving him his last will and testament, he says, I want you to be the Lord Regent until Joffrey comes of age. And in a form of deception, Ned writes down until my actual heir comes forth, or something like that. Like, he doesn't specify Joffrey. And so again, it's like probably the most untruthful thing that Ned has ever done, because he just seems to always follow honor and do the honorable thing. It's taking down his best friend / the king's words, and he changes his king's words to what he thinks should be right. I just thought that was interesting that that's something that he felt he needed to do in that moment.
Yeah.
So
Ready
next,
to roll out from there? We got another episode and a half to talk about.
yeah, I know we got to keep moving
All
here.
right.
Next,
Keep
we
going.
get kind of a scene of the Dothraki camp there, where Jorah has now received his pardon and can actually go home now, because the assassination is set in motion there. But actually, he actually ends up stopping the attempt on Dany's life, because it was like a wine seller there who tried to give her a barrel of poisoned wine. So then after that, we move off to the Night's Watch ceremony there. I wrote down like a good note here that Jorah Mormont can really give a hell of a speech there when he's up there talking to all of the soon-to-be members of the Night's Watch there, of how they're all these murderers, rapists, and all of that stuff, but now they're here for one singular purpose, to protect the world or something like that.
Yeah.
Then we get a kind of
Friendly talk succession.
Nope, but a little before that, just kind of covering the section about where they're going through assigning out roles to all of the new recruits of the White Night's Watch there. John is named a steward, and he is very, very upset about that. He thinks that Sir Alistair Thorne is fucking him over again, because fuck Sir Alistair Thorne again. But he's actually a nice
guy.
But he's actually the steward for Jorah Mormont, the Lord Commander there. So Sam kind of spins it to him
personally.
Yep, Sam kind of spins it that this is good for you. He's being groomed to take over. I always want to point out there's just another Maester Aemon moment there. Again, Maester Aemon is just a great character. He's just so witty. And then I wrote down a little joke there of like, Sam said he always wanted to be a wizard. I wrote that down because it made me laugh so much when he said that, because it brought a smile back to John's face.
Right.
So then next over is to your point there, Gary, of Renly talking to Ned about kind of trying to persuade him for succession there.
Ned talks to Renly talks to Ned about succession and like his brother, and I guess just trying to keep it rolling. Then there's a scene where Ned sends a letter to Stannis because Stannis hasn't been introduced. He's just this third brother that's just kind of, I think he's the warden of the Baratheon holdfast. So that's where he's at. Whereas Renly is just sort of part of the King's Council.
And then Ned also confides a little bit more in Baelish about kind of like what's going on here, and then Baelish kind of talks to him a little bit more about, you should really be doing this or something like that. So
just a lot about succession and like Littlefinger trying to, try to spit the seeds that like you what you want to be done, but you don't have the heart to say it. Like, and he's like, I got your back. I got your fucking back. Your wife told me to have your back, and I know what we need to do for your plan to be successful. Trust me. And new scene. Jorah and Khaleesi.
Nope. You're skipping one here. It's John and Sam say their vows for the Night's Watch there, which, Nick?
Such a great one. You want me to run through that?
Yes, please.
So, just really quick, they say their vows, and I had that written down here too. The words that they say are, "Hear my words and bear witness to my vow." They have a small gathering of folks there. He says he wants to do it in front of the old gods, so they actually go north of the wall to an old weirwood tree. And they make reference that the trees may even hear them or allow the old gods to hear them. So kind of to the audience he has there, but also for the old gods. Hear my words and bear witness to my vow. Night gathers, and now my watch begins. It shall not end until my death. I shall take no wife, hold no lands, father no children. I shall wear no crowns and win no glory. I shall live and die at my post. I am the sword in the darkness. I am the watcher on the walls. I am the shield that guards the realms of men. I pledge my life and honor to the Night's Watch for this night and all the nights to come. So there's a lot in there that they are giving up when you become a member of the Night's Watch, and ultimately for the rest of your life. From this night until my last. And yeah, it's not a vow that's being to be thrown away lightly, as we saw in the very first episode. If you just own yourself from the Night's Watch, the penalty is death.
Exactly. So then, though, the scene is kind of interrupted by Ghost finding something out in the wilderness out there, and it actually ends up being a hand of a corpse. And then it just kind of cuts from that scene. Like, everyone's just like, where did this hand come from? I mean, obviously it was attached to somebody at one point in time. But next we go back to Jorah and Dany kind of talking about the target that is on Dany's back there, of like how she might never be rid of this target that is on her back as long as Robert lives. And then there's kind of a scene of Khal Drogo basically saying he's making this big ceremony and show that he wants to now give his wife the Iron Throne that she so desperately is after.
Yes.
And then we find out Robert has now passed away, and Ned has now decided to make his move. He thinks going into the courtroom here, he has his family guard with him there. And he also thinks, though, that according to Peter Baelish, the Gold Cloaks, that would be the city guard, are on his side throughout all of this because Peter has supposedly paid them up on this. But Ned gives Barristan Selmy, because Barristan Selmy is like definitely an honorable man that nobody in the room could question. He gives him Robert's last written words there. He reads them out, but Cersei just basically takes them and rips them up because she's like, I don't have to listen to this. And then we find out that the Gold Cloaks have betrayed Ned and take out basically his family guard. And Peter Baelish, while Ned is trying to figure out what is going on there, Peter Baelish basically sneaks up behind him and pulls a knife out on him. And he basically says, I told you not to trust me. And scene ends, and that is the end of episode 7. Now moving on to our final episode for this session, episode 8, The Pointy End. And it starts out basically with the slaughtering continuing while Audrey...
Yeah, it's like right afterwards.
Yeah, it's basically like people busting out of the throne room, still getting stabbed. And then we cut to Arya, who is still training kind of with Syriel Farrell. She doesn't know that anything has gone on, so she's still going through her dancing lessons. And then she basically, like, they're Gold Cloaks, right? Meryn Trant and...
Correct, yes.
You're muted still, Gary, if you're trying to talk to us.
Gold Cloaks.
Okay.
I was saying, I think they're Lannisters.
Nope. Meryn...
Gold Cloaks?
Yep, they're in the
gold. No,
they're in the Golden King's, like, it's not
King's
so.
Guard.
Yeah, okay. So actually, yep, you are partially right. Yep. So it is the King's Guard and the Lannister forces basically come into where Arya is training. It's Meryn Trant, who's one of the Gold Cloaks, and then some of the Lannister army is with him as well to try and take Arya.
And that's how Arya. It's known that, like, my dad wouldn't send you fuckers for me.
Yep.
He'd send, like, somebody I know. Like,
Yep.
you'd send any, like, in any world, like, if you're gonna send someone to pick up your kid, you're gonna send somebody they know. You don't send the creepy Gold Cloak people.
Exactly.
Correct.
So Arya basically starts making her way through the castle lower and lower to try and get out and get away from this massacre that's going on. Sansa and her septum are basically walking through the halls, and they all of a sudden hear all of this calamity going on. And her septum basically says, "Run away, run back to your room, Sansa, and lock the door and don't open it for anybody you don't know." And she just keeps walking forward, and then Sansa runs into the Hound, and I can't quite remember what the Hound does here, other than
He
just
just like
frighten her.
steps up in front of her, and yeah,
Frighten
It's
her.
like
she says, the queen will stop you," and he says, "Who do you think sent me?"
Okay.
okay.
So then Arya somehow, through her maneuvering through the tunnels, basically of King's Landing, she ends up in a stable, which is where she finds like her belongings and stuff because they were trying to pack up and leave there. So she finds her sword, and all of a sudden this stable boy comes out of there and says, "You're coming with me, girl," or something like that. And Arya ends up stabbing this stable boy with her needle sword. And then
Mhm.
that's just kind of the it of all of the cacophony of basically the, the
mayhem,
slaughter
the mayhem in the
in the
um.
throne room there.
I noted that it was is Arya's first kill, and trying to keep rolling, but something I knew I had to ask just everyone else's opinions is: do you feel like Cyril Florell had the ability to pick up somebody else's sword before, like, because he was able to disarm like three freaking dudes with his wooden sword,
Yep.
and there you can see that there he was like, why didn't he pick up a real sword? I didn't know if it had to do with like, and you think he'd travel with the sword, so that was just something that I felt unrealistic to me.
Yeah,
But
it was a little kind of odd. But then you get kind of a scene there of Ned is now in chains in the jail cells underneath King's Landing there, and he gets visited by Varys, and then them two kind of have a conversation, and Varys kind of basically comes out and says, Varys serves the realm because someone must do that. Nobody else cares really about the common folk, it seems like.
Right. Yeah. Who do you serve? The realm. Said, "For someone must."
We cut back up to Castle Black, basically, where they have found basically the bodies that the hand was originally attached to, and they are bringing these bodies back inside the castle, and they want to hold off on burning them right now until they examine them more to see like what happened to these people. And this is also then where John learns the news of what happened with Ned there, of his treason there. I think the part that comes a little bit later here, so I'll just hold off on mentioning my favorite
Right.
line. So then we cut back to King's Landing there. Sansa is basically in a room surrounded by Cersei and members of the small council, Maester Pycelle, Varys, and Peter Baelish, Littlefinger, and she's kind of coerced into going against her family due to Cersei's scheming, where she is basically being forced to write a letter to her family in Winterfell saying, "This is what Ned did. You need to come to King's Landing and bend the knee to Joffrey and swear fealty to him." And they kind of utter a line there that I thought was kind of interesting. In like 10 years, who knows what she'll do, when they're talking about like once a part of a like uh, traitorous reasoning kind of flows through bloodlines. So just her father was a traitor, and she'll probably end up being a traitor because it's part of like, their blood or something like that.
Interesting. Yeah.
But I thought that was kind of interesting. I wrote down that part there of like, in 10 years, who knows what she'll do if we don't kind of try and snip her being a treasonous person right now out. So then though it kind of cuts back to Rob basically in Winterfell, where they get the note there of what happens, and they can kind of tell right away that this is not Sansa writing it. This is coming from Cersei here, pretty much. And Rob basically calls for the bannermen to be basically gathered.
There's a little bit of over the next couple scenes when it shows Rob that he's becoming the leader in the North they're asking him to be, or that he feels he should be in the absence of his father. I had in this first interaction how Theon asks, "Are you scared?" And he shows him his hand shaking, and Theon says, "Good. It means you're not stupid. You realize how dangerous this is, getting involved with these people."
Exactly. And then we have another scene here of Lysa and Kat having this disagreement that, Rob has called the bannermen, and Kat knows basically the letter that Sansa wrote, and she's trying to tell Lysa that she needs to kind of call her men to kind of come to this cause. And she says, no, I'm not going to send Knights of the Vale out to this war that I don't want to be a part of.
Yeah.
Next, we've got Bronn and Tyrion kind of beginning their travels together of traveling to wherever Tyrion needs to go, kind of get out of the Vale. And they end up being attacked by, not attacked, I should say, ambushed by the hill tribes there of the mountains there. And it's kind of funny. I like some of their names. So you're introduced to Shagga, son of Douth. And Tyrion makes a great line, like, Shagga asks Tyrion, like, how do you wish to die, half man? And he says, I don't remember the full joke there or whatever, but it's like a belly full of wine in my bed with a whore's mouth around my dick or something like that. Cock, I think he says.
Yep.
Birthday with a belly full of wine and a whore's mouth around my cock.
Yep. So even when it's kind of scared, Tyrion is still trying to crack jokes there.
Yes.
But then he actually, through all of his talking there, he does convince these Hill Tribe members to kind of help him get out of the Vale and get to where he needs to go. All right, back up to our northern friends there at the wall, and I get to utter my favorite line again. Fuck Alistair Thorne. His bullshit, God. Him basically just goading Jon to try and attack him because Alistair now knows that Jon's, Ned was kind of being convicted of treason there or whatever against the crown, so he's just using it to goad Jon to kind of antagonize him more, and Jon tries to stab him, but all of his friends stop him there real quickly.
Yeah, he almost does, yeah, which he says you'll hang for this,
Yep.
for an act of treason trying to hurt another member of the Night's Watch.
But then, though, we get a scene where... So, Jon then gets banished to his room for the rest of the evening by Jor, because Jor is there as well in this hall where they gather for eating. But then he's kind of... I don't know if he's awakened or if he's still kind of awake, but Ghost is up making a bunch of noise because he sensed something is going... Ghost, you can tell, sensed something's going on. And he goes into the Lord Commander's chambers because that's where Ghost leads him to. And this is where Jon ends up fighting his very first wight there of one of those guys that they had brought back into the castle, ends up reanimating and kind of coming alive and trying to attack, or trying to basically find the Lord Commander and try and attack him. And Jon, realized, he notices something's wrong because he stabs him a bunch, nothing happens. He sticks the sword straight through him, and the wight basically just pulls it out and just kind of comes attacking him again. And it isn't until basically Jon grabs the hand, like a lantern with his bare hands, throws it at the wight, hits him, and basically explodes, burning the guy on fire, setting the wight on fire, basically, that it finally stops. All right.
Correct.
Too bad he didn't have Longclaw.
Too bad he didn't have Longclaw. So next we're going to move on to kind of the Dothraki. We move back to the Dothraki where they've kind of sacked a village there, and Nick, do you want to kind of just take over talking about this scene just a little bit?
Yeah, that's fine. I had just written down again, sort of highlighting the brutality that the Dothraki have. This is their custom, is that if they raid a village, they rape and they pillage and they kill the men, women, and children that they don't need. They say, Jorah is explaining to Khaleesi as they walk through the area to Dany that, they'll take a lot of the people here, they'll sell them to the slavers. He says the slavers will give them gold, and Dany kind of says, I thought the Dothraki didn't want gold. And again, he kind of references, well, now they do, because you told them that we needed to go across the narrow sea. So they're getting money to get wooden ships. He says wooden horses to go across the Dothraki, go across the sea. And so you see how violent they are, and the attacks that they have on these people who clearly are already conquered. They're a defeated people, but the Dothraki are still killing people and taking the women for themselves, and that leads to some confrontation.
Yeah.
And then have as the next scene that Khal Drogo fights a guy.
Yes.
I don't even know if he's named. Just a guy. Just this guy who didn't get his dick wet.
And he gets a modified version of the Colombian necktie where he actually just gets his whole tongue and everything ripped out through his throat completely.
Mm-hmm. he like because it's like he threatens. He doesn't threaten. He disrespects the police, Danny, and he says because Danny's agitated that they're raping and pillaging these women. So Danny says, "I claim these women as my daughters or something like that, or I claim these daughters. They will not be mounted." And since this is their custom, like he wants to Gary so eloquently put it, get wet. So since he can't, he airs his grievances to Khal Drogo, and Khal Drogo asks the truth from Danny and sides with his bride. And this raider spits at Khal Drogo and says, any call who takes orders from a foreign wife is no call." And yeah, Khal Drogo just stands up and fights him, and he goes on and on about how I'm not just going to burn your body; that would be to honor you. I'm gonna, destroy you, decapitate you. Bugs will eat your lungs, and you'll be nothing but bones. And yeah,
Khal Drogo means to humiliate him. Like
exactly.
it's very much like he's just dodging him. Like as soon as he gets a point, he pulls out his knives, and I was like, he's holding a knife in each hand. He just drops it. I was like, I don't even need fucking knives to kill your ass.
A good takeaway from this too, though, is that he is cut. He does take a wound, almost like intentionally. He leans into the blade, and you see that Khal Drogo has a cut on his shoulder, kind of to the right side of his chest, and so he is cut in a small way. But yeah, he says that the opponent he's fighting, who is this unnamed writer, says, "You have to kill me first before you can dishonor me," and Drogo says, "I already have," and he just rips his tongue out.
And then Danny kind of trusts this lady she saved, basically, to kind of take care of patching the wound for Cal, for her husband there, basically.
Correct. She comes forth and says, "I know medicines." The Dothraki say she's a witch more so than a medicine woman, and ultimately, Khal Drogo says, "If this is what you want, Danny, then yes, you can. She can take care of me." And so she's going to help take care of him and patch his wound.
Yep. So next we cut back to Rob's kind of bannermen kind of having a conversation. I wrote down, I'm not entirely for sure this is the guy's name. Is that Big John Umber with the chains across his chest? Or
Yes.
okay.
Yes. John Umber.
Lord Umber is mad because someone else is going to lead the vanguard. And he's like, I will follow this.
McGlovers.
I will not follow a glove. An Umber will not follow a Glover into battle. And Lord Umber stands up and is like, "Your boy so green, you piss grass." And he draws his gonna draw a dagger, I think, and literally, Grey Wind.
Yes.
Grey Wind is his direwolf. Yeah.
Jumps across. He takes 2 fingers off the Umber's left hand. Because I think I watched that in the past, and I said, well, if you take 2 fingers off somebody's sword hand, you're going to severely limit them. But I guess if it's your offhand, maybe. And Rob stands up and is like, my father always told me it was death to draw steel on your liege lord. But I'm sure the Big John was just trying to cut my meat for me.
Yeah.
And then Lord Umber looks around and he realizes that everyone's looking at him, and he obviously just shit his pants, he did something he shouldn't have, and he's lost 2 fucking fingers from a dog. He's just trying to cut my meat for you. It's it was bloody tough meat.
Yep.
Yeah.
So then Rob is basically getting ready to basically go off to war. He says his goodbyes to Bran, basically, and you kind of see... Sorry, what?
He leaves in the middle of the night.
Yep.
So the Lannisters won't, because the Lannisters have spies everywhere.
Yep. And then you get to
more
see...
family members leaving Winterfell and leaving Bran by himself.
Yep. And then you get Rickon comes back on screen proclaiming that he doesn't believe Rob will ever come back.
Yeah, that was interesting. I don't remember that line in the previous watch through where he says, "Don't worry." Bran says to Rickon, his younger brother, the youngest Stark, "Don't worry, Rob will be back." And almost plainly, almost foreshadowingly, he says, No, he won't.
And then so
I just put that in the bucket of Rickon, who, like, I couldn't. If you told me any season after the first season who is Rickon, I'd be like, I don't know. He's probably somebody in somewhere, like, very minimalist character. He's a child through most of the season, and just a background character. Anyway.
Mm-hmm.
and then we've got Bran kind of cut to the next day or so. Bran's kind of in the Godswood praying to the old gods there, kind of for protecting Robb and everything. But he kind of starts developing that like bond with the wildling gal there. They kind of have a conversation back and forth. Then we see Hodor again, kind of all of a sudden come run. I don't know why he was, but like he comes running up to them just fully nude for some reason. It's like, Hodor, go put your clothes back on.
Yep. I like to think that that's just what happens often. Is Hodor just runs into a room, just flopping around, and he's like, "Oh, Hodor, go get your clothes."
But then the wildling gal basically says that, you know, the army is marching the wrong way. They should really be marching north, not south.
Right.
Back up to, again, the Castle Black there. They're now burning the bodies of the people they brought back, or what remains of the body that tried to attack the Lord Commander. And Sam points out that, you know, they were probably turned because they were touched by White Walkers. That's how he thinks that's happened. And like, where did you learn that? Oh, I read it in a book. I thought that was kind of funny. Just kind of hinting at kind of
craft.
It's his new tagline.
Yeah, Sam read it in a book. Tarly there. It kind of is. It's a funny thing that he says, but it also kind of just speaks a little bit more to Sam's character of like he is a well-read individual as well too.
Mm-hmm.
Next we get Kat basically on her way back. She thinks from the Eyrie, I think, but she ends up riding into Robb's army camp there. And again, there's a conversation going on there with Robb and his bannermen. And Lord Umber basically sees Kat, and they kick everybody else out of there. And then they talk kind of about the letter that they got from Sansa and how there's no mention of Arya in the letter.
Right.
And then there's kind of confirmed that there's about 18,000 men underneath Robb's command. And Kat kind of mentions too, kind of to your point earlier, that Tywin has not gotten kinder with his age there. He has developed more and more into a mean, bitter old man. And kind of Robb then kind of hears the cold truth of kind of what they must do there. Like, if they don't succeed, Ned will die, they will die. So they have to basically win at what they are going to attempt to do there. And then, speaking of returns there, our next scene is Tyrion finds his father's camp there, basically, and kind of gets to meet face-to-face with his father, and you get to kind of see the little interaction they have kind of as father-son. And you're also introduced to, I don't know if he's actually named specifically Kevin Lannister or Uncle there. I know he's called Uncle there, but you meet Kevin Lannister too as well, which is Tywin's brother. And then Tyrion does like an introduction to his father of the Hills tribe that is kind of traveling with him.
Very formal, like introducing like the two great groups of people. Like I introduced like these great warriors, and then he has to like introduce all the bullshit titles below his father.
Yep. And then it's kind of funny, like and Bronn, son of Broad turns looks. You probably wouldn't have known him.
Also, there's kind of a fun interplay with the wine that just if on a rewatching you definitely notice it. Of like Tyrion grabs the wine, his father just like pulls it back to his side of the table, and like we gotta talk business. You don't get to start drinking, and then shit happens, and then as soon as his father like is leaving the tent, Tyrion grabs the wine.
And then you get cut back to Robb and his forces there. They're kind of discussing everything about like, okay, where do we cross? And then again, it's another name drop of the late Lord Walter Frey there, Lord of the Twins there. They have one of the spots for crossing the river. And also too, kind of, they've got a captured spy who they basically let go and say, you know, tell Tywin we have this many people or something like that. 20,000.
18,000 to 20,000.
Yep.
And Robb very blatantly, sort of a callback to Catelyn in episode 4, where she loudly and often said, "I'm going to Winterfell." Rob said loudly and very bluntly, like just like I'm gonna f the Lannisters up so bad, even let them know I'm coming. Like just playing into like he's a green boy. He's like just letting every assumption Tywin Lannister has about Robb Stark just reinforce it, like that he's cocky and he would just run his whole army directly into an ambush, like just like playing the game and playing to the Lannisters' egos.
Yep.
Yep.
All right, and then we cut back to now King's Landing there. Janos Slynt is now actually formally named as a character. He is now given a lordship of Harrenhal there for his acts of bravery there of helping the Lannisters root out the traitorous Ned Stark there.
Bravery.
You kind of see that Sansa, as she's making her way through the throne room hall there, she's kind of being shunned by all of the people that she would have normally interacted with as she's slowly making her way towards the front. Joffrey has named his grandfather Tywin Lannister Hand of the King. And then they kind of, next is a scene where they kind of force Barristan Selmy to retire for the fact that he wasn't quick enough to save the previous king, and they just don't think that he would be quick enough to do it again for their young king, even though... Sorry, what?
I could cut you all the ribbons.
Oh, yep. So even though the oath that Barristan Selmy swore is for life there pretty much, he kind of makes a big show of basically taking off his armor and stuff like that. He pulls his sword out, and then that's where he drops the line to, like Gary said, like he says to the guys in front of him, like, you guys know I could cut you all to ribbons before you would have anything to do with me there. Basically just drops his...
Again, I just wanted to point out, Barristan Selmy is like the best sword fighter in one of the best sword fighters in the Seven Kingdoms. So even though, yes, he's older, whereas they sort of see this as like he can retire, he can go out and live his best days. This would be like sending someone home while they're in their prime, saying, "You're no longer needed. Don't worry, we got this without you." And it's kind of a slap in the face at how good Barristan is and how poorly he's treated. Which is why he's just kind of denounces the King's Guard and throws his sword down.
Yep.
I think some of this is politics, because I think it also does Jaime become promoted at that point, or yeah? So I think there's some politics that I guess Cersei playing her politics to ensure that Jaime is more heavily rooted in King's Landing.
Yeah, and also too just kind of consolidating power around the Lannisters of like, these are the people we trust in our positions of power. And then Sansa steps forward basically towards the end of the court's session there to kind of beg for mercy for her father. And in order for mercy to be granted, Joffrey says the father has to confess his crimes and proclaim Joffrey king. And the episode ends with Sansa basically saying he will. And
very, very interesting.
Yep. And so that basically concludes episode 8 there. Any other kind of final points we want to touch on about any of the previous 4 episodes or anything from beforehand? Nothing from Gary there?
Not really. I need to talk less.
Again, like I said, I think these episodes will probably start getting closer towards the shorter end as we get going. Just because, again, definitely this first season is just so much setup is needed to be done, basically, with such a dense kind of world, a lived-in world there, basically. You got to talk about all these people and their history and everything like that, and just kind of set the scene for what's going on.
I think as these first few episodes go too, trying not to give away any spoilers, we see more pockets of groups. These first episodes where everyone's together, there's just so many interactions with everyone else able to react to everybody else. Like, I wrote down something that I didn't want to get into it, but like just Littlefinger, Varys, and Pycelle, like just giving little side eyes at each other, like, really? You're going to try and bring that up, or you're going to try and pull this off? and you get all these interactions versus where I think we're going to see more and more of these one-offs, or like, what is Jon doing by himself? What is, the Lannisters doing by themselves?
Exactly. Yep. All right. To jump into next time, then our next episode will be covering just one episode. So the way Game of Thrones had always worked for the first 6 seasons was they always kind of had basically the big thing for the season happen in episode 9 that basically set the tone going forward of this is how the season's going to end. Then kind of this is going to set the pieces in place then for as we march towards the end of the season. And it also basically sets up the big motion of event of what's going to kind of carry forward then for the next seasons to come there. So episode 9 will cover episode 3 of our podcast will cover just one episode from season 1 called Baelor. All right. Any final closing remarks, Gary, Nick? We'll go Gary here first.
I was muted. I don't know. I'm just excited for the next episode, and excited to get into more philosophical questions than like heavy fucking plots.
Synopsis.
Nick, anything from you?
I'm just excited to see what's going to happen. I think everyone's poised to only have good things happen to them in this next episode. So I don't know.
Nothing but bright, sunshiny days in store for everybody in King's Landing.
Exactly.
And the rest of the kingdom. All right. I suppose that'll do it for this episode here. Thank you, anyone who might still be out there actually listening. We all greatly appreciate it. I wish everybody nothing but the best and have a good one. See you later.
Yes. Thanks all. It's all downhill from here.
Yeah.
You gonna turn on your camera, Nick, so I can make offensive images?
I'm naked right now.
Yeah, then please don't.
I
Okay.
just don't have a shirt on.
Yep, keep your camera off then. So, here we go. Right there, Gary. 3, 2, 1.